Fans of the Horus Heresy, thank you very much for joining me for a rules and tactics review of the Telamon Heavy Dreadnought for the Legio Custodes for the Horus Heresy game in Warhammer 40,000 30k. So this is a follow-on video from my earlier model review and the various videos I did showcasing this kit and its construction. I picked this up as an early release from Warhammer Fest 2017, and at that time there were no rules available. This model is going on general release next week, so today is the 1st of July, and Forge World has made the rules available on its website. So I thought it'd be good to fill in the gap in my review and talk about the tactics and capabilities of this model. It's available as a free PDF download. This is a printout that I've done. At the moment they say they're experimental, so that normally means they might change the points. If you have any remote interest in this model, go download a copy of these rules while they're still there, either as something that you fight with or something that you are going to be fought against with. So the Telamon is a heavy support choice for the Talons of the Emperor list, which is found in Horus Heresy Book 7. These are 7th edition rules, so please do note that at the moment the Horus Heresy is in the 7th edition, so this isn't the new 8th edition. So yes, please do bear that in mind. The Telamon Heavy Dreadnought is a heavy support choice for the Talons of the Emperor list, which is found in Horus Heresy Book 7 Inferno. So what I'm going to do is we'll go through the stats and the weapon options, then I'm going to discuss tactics and comparisons against some units from the Space Marine Legion. Its stats are weapon skill 6, ballistic skill 5, strength is 9, front and side armour 13, rear armour is 12, initiative is 5, attacks is 4, and hull points are 4. It is a vehicle walker character. It costs 300 points basic. For the 300 points you get the following equipment. You get 2 Telamon Cestus with inbuilt Proteus plasma projectors, 1 torso-mounted Spiculus bolt launcher, so that's this weapon up top. This is the Cestus. Smoke launchers, a searchlight, extra armour, armoured ceramite, a multi-layered refractor field, which is a new piece of equipment, and it has the following special rules: move through cover, unyielding sentinel, and indomitable charge. So move through cover is a standard special rule in 7th, the other two are unique to this model. And the Telamon has 1 equipment option available, and the option is to replace the Cestus and Proteus plasma projector with an Arachnus storm cannon, and that costs 30 points. And this weapon here is the Arachnus storm cannon. So let's go through its special rules. Firstly, indomitable charge. When charging, the model inflicts D6 Hammer of Wrath hits rather than just 1. So that's very potent. Hammer of Wrath are at the strength of the model, and this is strength 9, so you can threaten quite heavy tanks just with your Hammer of Wrath attack without even getting into the Cestus, and obviously lethal to anything other than the heaviest of infantry. The next special rule, which is unique to this model, is a very powerful one, and it is called Unyielding Sentinel. With this, if you suffer a penetrating hit, the attacker has to roll 2 dice and take the lowest result on the vehicle damage table and apply that effect. So what that in effect does is that gives this a very high degree of resilience against the more severe results and also explodes results. The only other model that I can think with anything remotely comparable to that would be a Land Raider Achilles with its ferromantic invulnerability rule. So that is really powerful, that, and really has the potential to suck the lethality out of high AP shots. Okay, the next special rule is a piece of equipment. This is the multi-layered refractor field, and it's a very straightforward, so it's a 4+ invulnerable save, increasing to 3+ against a weapon with a blast or a template effect. You know, any battle cannon hits or any sort of flame hits against it, it's getting a 3+ invulnerable save against those. So that's a very powerful invulnerable save. Okay, and now let's move on to the actual weaponry. So the first let's deal with the standard weapon, which is a Cestus and with the inbuilt plasma projector. So the plasma projector is a fascinating and, as far as I understand it, unique weapon. It's a template weapon. It's strength 5, AP 2, assault 1, and gets hot. So I believe this is the first plasma weapon with a template effect. So with strength 5 and AP 2, that's absolutely deadly against any infantry full stop. Terminators, Marines, anything like that. Very, very dangerous. Although, you know, it does have the gets hot rule there, so there is a risk of taking some damage to your Dreadnought. The actual Cestus itself is melee only, strength ×2 and AP 2. It has the following rules of melee, shred, so reroll any unsuccessful wounds against any target other than a vehicle, and it has murderous strike. And murderous strike is a rule we've had before. Any to hit roll of a 6 becomes instant death. So yeah, I guess that's reflecting the quite simply massive fist and the power that this thing, I guess, would wield. So that's the Cestus. Now the Spiculous Bolt Launcher, which is the other standard weapon. This has a range of 48 inches, strength 5 and AP 4. It's heavy 5, rending and volley fire. So rending means any to wound rolls of a 6 go to AP 2, so it has the capability to defeat heavy infantry. And the special rule of volley fire is what makes this weapon very good. If the bearer doesn't move, it can double the number of shots it can fire. There's no exception to that for Relentless. So it's like the heavy conversion beamer on a Demos Predator or the heavy conversion beamer on a Contemptor Dreadnought. Even though those models normally are relentless in effect, it doesn't apply to that, so you have to stay still. I'm going to show you though that that doesn't matter a bit. So now the weapon option, the Arachnus Storm Cannon. This thing's a beast, it really is. It has two fire modes. The first is concentrated fire, which is range 72, strength 9, AP 1, heavy 2, exoshock. And the exoshock is the same rule we've had on the Arachnus las cannon battery and a few other weapons in the Custodian arsenal. Every time you score a penetrating hit, if you roll a 4+ on a d6 roll, you get a second automatic penetrating hit, and you can't take a cover save against this additional hit. And then the second fire mode is range 48, strength 7, AP 3 and heavy 7. So this is an absolute beast of a gun. That's the only way to put it. Probably one of the most effective and versatile weapons in any arsenal anywhere in 30 or 40k. Absolutely deadly at anything it does. Brilliant weapon. Unsurprisingly, the war gear on this thing is very formidable. Whether this is fighting at range against armoured targets, at range against dispersed targets, or heavily armoured infantry, or fighting in melee, this Dreadnought has got a weapon for every occasion, and it will excel in every single one of those capabilities. It is peerless, I would say, in terms of its capabilities. And, you know, I think that makes sense because this is described as being one of the rarest pieces of equipment in the entire Imperial arsenal, with an enormous investment in time and resources to produce it, and only the most worthy custodians being interned within it. As to how you configure it, well, I think, this configuration is clearly a handy do-it-all one. There's nothing that you haven't got a weapon to fight. If you want to go maximum potency in close combat, you would stick with the pair of Cestus and the plasma projectors as well, going to make it extremely deadly at short range against enemy infantry. Obviously with that approach you haven't got anything to deal with armour, so you have to get into melee to deal with armour. If you want to go for the fire support option, you take a pair of these Arachnus Storm Cannons, and then you've got an armament, an overwhelming amount of firepower. And this is what kind of brings me to saying about it doesn't really matter if you don't move with the Spiculous Bolt Launcher, because with a pair of these at 48 or 72 inches range, as long as you deploy it correctly, you probably won't need to move for most of the battle, and you can keep pumping out 4 strength 9 AP 1 shots a turn, 14 strength 7 AP 3 shots a turn, plus the 10 shots out of a bolt launcher. So this thing is going to absolutely tear enemy formations apart. It's brilliant. In terms of its qualitative combat abilities, you can't describe it any other way. And for 300 points, well, in this configuration, this is 330 points. Maybe, if anything, it's a bit undercosted, particularly when we compare it to the Leviathan Dreadnought, which we're about to do. But then it's getting perilously close to the cost of an Imperial Knight. Clearly, it's not a Lord of War option, but it is expensive and it is getting close. And it's one of those units, a bit like the Thanatar Calyx for the Mechanicum. And when properly kitted out, you are moving close to the cost of an Imperial Knight for it. And this is a very, very effective unit. For the points, the fact it's one unit in the slot, if you're playing a high points game and you have the choice of a Galatus or the Telamon, you take the Telamon. You take the Telamon over one of the Caladius Grav tanks. I think each have got complementary abilities, but the Telamon is by far the better all-rounder. I think another thing about this is just demonstrating how in most respects it outclasses its opponents in the Legion. So firstly, the Radio Dreadnought. I've got it with the autocannons and missiles here. These are similar-ish weapon systems, although this is better against armour than these. Well, it's arguable. These are better against heavier targets, I suppose. With its rending rule, then sometimes this will be better than this against armour. This is great against aircraft. We'll set aside the aircraft ability. The autocannon battery is completely outclassed by this thing. If you give air of these storm cannons, then the firepower on it completely outclasses anything that a radio can offer. It's just as simple as that. This can take the Arachnus heavy las cannon battery, which is 2 shots at strength 10 but only AP 2, whereas this is 2 shots at strength 9 AP 1. So, do the math, which is better, it depends. But the fact that you can put a pair of those on the Telamon means it can massively outgun anything a DeRadio can offer. So yeah, so no competition there, I don't think, apart from the fact that obviously the DeRadio is cheaper, although not that much cheaper. It's probably about 70 points cheaper. So yeah, beware DeRadios. And then I guess the other comparison, and probably the closer comparison, is the Leviathan Siege Dreadnought. Now, the weapons are somewhat different, and they do fulfill slightly different roles, these two dreadnoughts. Leviathan Siege Dreadnought is more orientated around close range combat, because you can have two arm guns, you've got the chest mounted weapons, and you've got the launcher up top. I think even so, the Telamon outperforms it in general. In this configuration at 330 points, when I field this, my configuration is normally around 310, 320 points. There's not much in the cost of them. I don't think the Telamon can quite match the capability of the Leviathan against enemy infantry if you configure it correctly. However, in dreadnought to dreadnought fights and anti-vehicle roles, the Telamon is far superior, and overall just a much more versatile unit. I guess where there's not as much distance between the two is in the defensive capabilities. They both have the same armor configuration. For ranged attacks and close combat attacks, they have comparable saves. Obviously the Telamon is a bit more resilient against blast weapons on account of its 3+ save with its multi-layered refractor field. Close combat, they're both very potent. The Telamon again has an edge with a weapon skill of 6. You know, if you were to kind of like square the two off against one another, for the Leviathan to stand any chance, it has to charge the Telamon. If the Telamon gets a charging on the Leviathan, first they're going to get hammered by that enormous stack of Hammer of Wrath attacks, and then the Telamon will strike first on account of its being initiative 5. Even if the Leviathan charges a Telamon, it's equal initiative. I think Leviathans need to be very wary of this thing as well. And in a ranged fight situation, the Leviathan needs to seek cover as soon as possible. So is it all great stuff for the Telamon? Well, clearly its combat capabilities are very impressive. I guess there's two slight weaknesses, or two things to be aware of when fielding this model. And I'm just going to bring a few dreadnoughts on just to make the point. Here we have a selection of, you know, the dreadnoughts we've been talking about. We've got the Contemptor Achilles, also for the Custodians. What is the vulnerability here of the Telamon? Well, the Telamon isn't really much more durable than the Leviathan. It has 4 hull points, it has the same front armour, it has a bit better invulnerable save. More powerful offensively, but defensively it doesn't really stack up any better. And it's important to bear that in mind, particularly when you consider the height of the dreadnought compared to the others. This thing is a big target, and it's going to be harder to hide, and it's going to get shot more often than these 3 other dreadnoughts. While its defensive stats are good, they are not really much better than the nearest competitor, shall we say. If you seek cover with a DeRadio, then you can often get a cover save of 4+, which, you know, puts it on often an equal footing to the Telamon, and it only has the same number of hull points, so in terms of vulnerability to glancing damage, it's going to go down as quickly as the Leviathan. And then finally, the other thing that you need to be aware of with the Telamon, its other vulnerability, I guess, is the fact it comes on this enormous 100mm base. That means in a melee situation, there are a lot of enemy troops that can get around and attack this thing. A lot of enemies haven't got the weapons to damage this, but if you're fighting enemy dreadnoughts, for example, it's quite easy to gang up on this, and you can easily gang up on it with an enormous number of Terminators. Now, I'll leave it to your imagination to think of the way you could configure Legion assets to swarm this thing in melee, and this enormous base means you can really swarm it heavily in melee, depending on the terrain. So just like for shooting, the drawback of a Telamon is its big size and the fact that that does make it more vulnerable, and it isn't really defensively that much more strong than other similar dreadnoughts. I've said a lot about it because it is a fascinating unit, and as I say, qualitatively it is very potent. So those are my thoughts. What do you think about this newest Custodian dreadnought? I'll be very interested to hear your comments and observations. I have a feeling that it might be slightly underpointed at 300 points base, or 330 as we've got it here. I think, I don't know, it could maybe be as much as 20 or 30 points underpointed. I don't know, it just feels a bit on the light side. I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on that as well. So thank you very much for watching. I'll speak to you next time, and goodbye.